delay.
Okay, great. We are streaming on YouTube. There's a 20-second delay. Is it on there?
Is it supposed to come up somewhere? I don't know.
Yeah, refresh the page. It'll be like a live.
I've never done a live, so I don't know. Okay.
20 seconds. I'll be your timekeeper.
Okay. I don't know if anybody's tuning in just yet. If they are, we are just waiting on one more person to connect. We're waiting on Sebastian to troubleshoot. So there are a few people watching on YouTube. So I will just say, while we wait, to pose questions either in the YouTube chat, if you're watching via YouTube, and then I guess we'll be broadcasting the Zoom and people can enter in the Q&A section here. But let me start with asking you guys what whiskeys you're drinking.
Who should go first? Are you on, Ali?
Yeah, I'm here.
Let's start with the actual Scot.
Okay, well, I'm going for Leitchig by Tobermory, the Tobermory distillery. On the palate, Leitchig is big and full of driftwood, and it's kind of oily. It's got burnt vegetation and seaweed and a little bit of sweetness, brown sugar. It's delightful. It's really wonderful. It's yeah, on the nose it's quite light, but on the palate it's quite rich, medium bodied but quite rich. I heartily recommend Leitchig to you. Slange.
Slange. So let me ask you something before we move on to Peter. What part of Scotland is that from?
That's from the Isle of Mull, a beautiful little harbour town called Tobermory. And that's the Tobermory distillery is you know, I guess it's quite a well-established distillery, and Leitchig is as kind of a secondary whiskey they bring out of that same distillery. It's I don't know if it's as well known, but Tobermory is quite established, and the Tobermory whiskey is a bit of a softer whiskey. I think it's a little got a bit more kind of complexity in its aromas, but the Leitchig is, I think, lesser known, and I guess that's why I'm more excited by that, because I like to tell people that I've got like the next like a more interesting whiskey than them, you know.
For sure, the name of it is like you'd have Americans calling it Ladaig.
Yeah.
Peter, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking Michter's Rye whiskey.
Aha, good old
from
American.
From the U.S. state of Kentucky. They almost atone for giving us Mitch McConnell by producing this whiskey. I should have gone first, because I can't say all this like stuff about the palate and everything, except it's delicious. If I'm going to drink straight whiskey, I like to drink a rye, and I like Michter's. It's not too sweet.
Usually delicious is the only prerequisite, I would say.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I've got this this whiskey, which is a single malt Scotch. I think it's from. Do you say Islay? Is that the island?
Islay.
Isla. There we go. And it's called Airstone, and just bought it on a whim. Had never heard of it, but just it's peated. It's quite lovely, and it was the price was right because it's about half the price as Talisker, but I don't think it's half as good. It's quite good. So if you see this around, Al, you've not heard of this?
No, I haven't. But you basically can't chuck a stick on Isla without hitting a distillery. It's quite funny. You know, all these other regions of Scotland that have covering vast geographical areas, and they have dozens of distilleries. But then Isla's this one island, and it's just packed with distilleries. It's like there's a single coastal road, and every turn there's another distillery. You've got Ardbeg, you've got Bruichladdich, dozens of them. But I've not heard of, what's that, Airstone?
Airstone, yeah, is that right?
Great. No, I'll look out for it.
Yeah, it's good. I'm sure my amateur palate can't distinguish, but I will say, and by the way, anybody who's just tuning in now, we're just having some whiskey talk while we wait for Sebastian to link up. And I will say that, in our brief but memorable time in Scotland, Kelly and I tried every peated whiskey we could get our hands on. And our favorite, for anyone interested in this, was actually one called Kilchoman, which is spelled Kilchoman. And we were lucky to find it in the United States too.
Yeah,
so you guys use the same alphabet in Scotland as us? It doesn't sound the same.
Yeah, you got to work on your kind of your throaty guttural noises. The CH it comes out in almost every sentence here.
Hey,
hey, gents.
Kilchoman.
Cheers, buddy.
The party.
That's
Thanks,
a
Sebastian.
I'm still empty. Per usual.
great. Yeah. Good, man. Good that you linked up. So we were just having a little whiskey banter. Alasdair educated us a wee bit. And let me start off. I'm not sure. Let me see the stats here. We got about 10,000 people watching. Thanks so much for tuning in.
10,000?
No.
Oh.
I actually don't know. I have no idea how many people are tuning in via YouTube. But since I roped all of you in, let me just give a brief little introduction to, even though this is not going to be this is not an interview. I'm not hosting. This is a dialogue. We're all just meeting up, and it's informal.
Wait, so I can't get a job out of this?
Well, you might be able to. From one of our adoring 10,000 fans. But anyway, my name is Steve Shaheen, and I don't know how everybody is banked on people's screens, but let me introduce everybody one by one. Peter Glenn Oakley, wave your hand.
Hi.
All right.
Everybody.
Alasdair Thomson.
Hello.
All right. And Sebastian Martorana.
Here, finally.
Hey. So thank everybody. First of all, thank you guys. I'm so glad we made this happen. And thanks to anybody who is tuning in. And a very special thank you to Amanda Martorana, Sebastian's wife, who without whom none of this would have been possible, for hosting this and setting up the technical things. We are troglodytes. We're not too bad with a hammer and chisel, but when it comes to this technical stuff, I can definitely say that I'm fully dependent on her tonight. So anyway, what I thought we could do is, rather than, for people who might not have, for anybody who's interested in our practices and our work, you can find stuff on us online and just, Google us if you haven't or whatever. But rather than going through some kind of boring bullet point of resume items, I figured maybe we could just each, the thing, we're all friends and colleagues. The one thing that binds us together, which is why I presume a lot of people are tuning in, is that we all sculpt stone. We all do it professionally. And maybe each of us could just spend just a few minutes addressing sort of three aspects of our practices, which is the when we got into it, how we got into it, and why we got into it. This very esoteric sort of like tributary of art making. What do you guys think?
Sure.
Sounds good.
Should we go alphabetically?
Sure. That's Martorana.
Oh, is it? All right.
Let's not go by first names.
Right. Well, yeah. So sorry, I've already forgotten the order of the questions. Is it a when and a why and a
It's
where?
like, when you got into it, how you got into it, and why, that rather than watercolor painting or being a doctor or whatever.
Well, the watercolor painting started first. Then, of course, that's painting is always kind of the gateway drug into stone carving, of course. I mean, that's a natural progression, right? So for me, I actually did the first bit of stone carving I ever did when I was a teenager. I grew up in Virginia. So in Virginia, they have the Virginia Governor School, which is like a summer program where they kind of let kids loose if you apply and get in, just give you a kind of ton of tools and stuff. And so I did a little bit of that then when I was probably about 16. And then in college, I'm trying to think of the short version, in undergrad, I was an illustration major, but I really like sculpture. They didn't allow double majors at Syracuse. And so I ended up taking all my electives in the sculpture program, and I went and studied in Italy for a little while. And at that time I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And I wasn't doing stone carving in Italy like some of you guys were, but I was studying it. And so I came back and I got a job at a stone company in my own, basically my own hometown, just outside of DC. And so I started working there while I was still in college. And then after I graduated, still in illustration, I worked there for a few years afterwards as an apprentice until ultimately I had enough proficiency to leave. And then I went to graduate school in Baltimore at the Reinhardt School of Sculpture at MICA. So that's kind of the when and where, I guess. And yeah, the why. I guess that's the hard one. It's just the coolest form of making artwork that I could think of, and even as like a little kid, I don't know about you guys, if like you had the art books and stuff, but it was like, those were the sculptures that I was attracted to as like a little kid. Like when I barely even knew what I was looking at, but I knew I was looking at rocks. I was like, that is really awesome. So.
That's cool. That's great. And by the way, let me just interject that anybody who's watching on YouTube and wants to pose a question, because we have framed this as like sort of Ask Me Anything about our practices, about the whiskeys we're drinking, about our personal lives. Can't promise we'll answer it all. Just post it in the YouTube chat section, or if you're tuning in via Zoom, there is a Q&A section where you can just post questions. All right, so we got Peter Glenn Oakley. Oh.
Yeah, that's me. Maybe the why part of it's the easier one for me to talk about. I don't know. None of it's really like clear to me anymore, like how all this happened or what's going to happen, especially. But I don't know, like kind of like what Sebastian said there, like there was always this kind of subroutine running since I was a kid about marble sculpture. And I wasn't immersed in it or anything, but I was exposed to it young. We went like a vacation to this place in South Carolina called Brook Green Gardens, and they have some marble sculpture. And kind of a little bit later, when I was able to go out on my own a little bit, anytime I would visit a city and go to the art museum, it was always some marble sculpture. But I didn't get my hands on anything like that. Personally, as I was coming up as a teenager, I was really into rock climbing. And through the rock climbers that I knew, a lot of those people would do masonry work. They would do stone masonry work. It was something you could do. You could be really rough and kind of uncouth, and you could still make a decent living, and you could make your own schedule. So I got into masonry, and then eventually I started doing inscription work, because I did start to kind of dabble around doing sculptural stuff on my own, but I did inscription work pursuant to masonry jobs that I had. And I paid for a studio with that, and then I started doing real sculpture. I sold my first sculpture thing in 2005 or 2006.
Okay.
Cool.
Did I hit all
great.
the how, when, and why?
I think
Is that what
so.
they are?
Yeah, but you basically, and also just you're self-taught, right?
Yeah. Although, you know, I keep learning a little bit at a time from different people. I've learned from just watching all you guys stuff that you post, and you know, like Leonardo Corsinini showed me how to use a point chisel. Was that in 2018 when I was in Italy with you guys?
Last summer.
Yeah, Leonardo
So
showed me
before
how to
times?
use
A long time
point
ago.
chisel. Yeah, it seems like a long time.
Well, I mean, for a guy who has carved a typewriter, 1 or 2?
2 and 2.5.
With all like underneath the keys and everything, to have circled back to a point chisel just last summer is kind of remarkable, because it's not a usual trajectory to teach yourself to that level.
Like yeah, Leonardo just took me back to day one. Like, oh, here's how he had seen me using a point and chisel, and he was super nice about it. He had seen my work, and he respects me, and he wasn't being pedantic or anything, but he was like, you know, here's how you use a point chisel, and you know, so live and learn. It's good to run into people who really do have the education, because he's how many generations deep?
With 3 sort of, yeah.
Yeah, so always learning.
Very cool. And Ali, how about you?
I guess the when was came for me off the back of a degree in art history, in which I sort of was exposed to the theory of sculpture, a kind of multimedia sculpture. But I was, from the get-go, I was drawn to works made in stone, and this is also at the same time tying into these kind of peripheral studies of classical archaeology and classical art, and I guess the main sort of the common theme running through them, all these subjects, was stone. And so I was sort of, I was having all this, you know, this exposure to of this variety of studies in stone, all the while never having put, you know, chisel to stone ever. And it was only after my degree that I found myself off the coast of Vancouver on an island, where I encountered a sculptor working in a wee gift shop. She was working on an eagle carved out of soapstone, and it was like this final piece of a puzzle being put into place. And I sort of put the theory and the practice together, and I said to myself, that's cool. I want to explore this. And so she sent me away with just a little chunk of soapstone and a rasp. And I went back to the boat that I was staying on, and I used this rasp to file out a small sculpture, which still sits on my parents' hearth to this day, my very first sculpture. But that set me on a path towards just, I guess, exploring stone and trying to get my hands on any and all materials I could, and any and all experiences that I could encounter. And that led me to apprenticing for a short time a sculptor called Mark Menon, who Steve knows, based out of Connecticut. And he took me on with no experience, and he threw me in at the deep end, gave me a 12-inch wet saw, and said, you know, rough this stuff out. And so it was a bit of a baptism by fire for me. And it was only after that experience that I decided that if I was going to take this craft seriously, then I should go and study. And having met Steve in Connecticut, and learning that he had studied out in a place called Serra di Rapalano, just outside of Siena. He suggested that that might be a good place for me to also receive some training. So I went out there in 2009 for a year, learned my diploma, or achieved my diploma there, got a good grounding in stone carving, and then came back to Edinburgh, set up my own practice. And I've been independent, I guess, since then, trying to scrape a living, but doing what I love.
Literally? endless sculpture puns. Very good. So I'll try to be
questions.
What's that?
Was there a third question there that I should have answered?
Just no. Well, it was just, you know, how we got into stone sculpture, when it was, and why. But I think you know, intrinsic in your answer were embedded all of those things.
Cool.
Yeah, and I guess for myself, I won't. You know, I'm going to try to condense this. I will say for anybody watching who doesn't do this professionally, if it's inspiring to know, I definitely gave up on my first stone sculpture. It was like way too boring and slow for me. This was back in undergrad. I took a sculpture elective, and I was curious. I'd always been curious about stone. The professor had a kind of a, you know, a lump of limestone, which is very soft, and a set of really crappy tools, and I just kind of banged away on it. But just got frustrated, and the college system, the undergrad system, doesn't really allow for the time necessary to get involved in stone, because you have to kind of do a project and then it gets reviewed a week or two later or whatever. So I'll blame it a little bit on that. But it wasn't until I found myself living in Italy as an expat, without the intent of studying, you know, stone sculpture. I was just over there living in the year 2000, and I was fascinated by all this work, and I had always been fascinated, like I think all of us, seeing stone sculpture in books, and you know, like the historical stuff from the Renaissance. And I was seeing this stuff now in person, living in Siena, on buildings inside of the cathedral, and just wondering, like, does anybody do this anymore? And I think I was walking by a little gallery in Siena, and I saw a tiny little stone sculpture that was obviously contemporary. It was abstract. And I thought, okay, well, so there's somebody doing this. Maybe I could apprentice myself with somebody and learn this. And eventually, I just by luck stumbled into the program that Ali mentioned before, which was like a 2-year trade program being run outside of Siena, not for would-be Michelangelos, but really just for people who wanted to get into the trade, because the older stone, like master stone carvers, were aging out and not being replenished by young people. So like imagine there was a lack of welders or something, and they had to run a quick intensive 2-year program to get some people up to speed, you know, to fill in the gaps. Because over there, they actually do need competent stone artisans to be able to restore cathedrals, and to, you know, all the buildings, everything is made out of stone, right? So so that's how I did it. I was in this 2-year program, and then came back to the States, and it's a long story after that. You know, I got my MFA at the New York Academy of Art in sculpture. I was interested in figurative work. I worked on a couple of monuments and other things, and it's just been, you know, my practice from then forward. Why, I don't know. I mean, other than being fascinated with it, art, you know, in an art historical sense, I do think, you know, it's a very, you really do. People often ask, I think, why, you know, what would you say to like a young aspirant sculptor, or just someone who wants to get into this? I think with this medium in particular, you kind of figure out early on whether you're into it or not, because I think that's the passion for it is the only thing that pushes you through many other obstacles, you know, because like we joked about watercolor paint, and I mean, like watercolor is actually just a very difficult form of painting, but there's a lot of, you know, obstacles if you want to get into stone in terms of the infrastructure you need, you know, moving it, buying it, the tools you need for it. So yeah,
there are so many obstacles. It's remarkable that the four of us, amongst many sculptors, actually make a practice out of it. There's so much in the way to deter you: sore muscles, stone chips flying in your face, cost of the material, finding a workspace that's this is a very antisocial media to work in. So it's actually remarkable that the four of us have sort of tried to build careers in this particular method of art making.
Remarkable or stupid, which is the adjective.
Yeah, you know, like that, those things you just listed, Alasdair, for most people, if they were already asking why, they would be like, well, why? Especially now, why? You know, like after you've listed those things, but it's kind of like, you know, like Alessandro Lombardo says, he's just like, I just love it. I love like he's in love with it. He just like, if somebody asks him why, he's like, I just, you know, I'm not trying to speak for him, but I do feel a kind of a similar thing. It's like, it's just what I just do it. Like I've always gravitated towards stone, and the sculptural ideas that I have make sense to execute in stone. It's just kind of like, if it makes sense to you and you never ask yourself why, it's like, oh, I kind of found my thing here, you know, like I just happen to be pretty good at it and I like doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've tried other media, and goodness knows, I could make a lot more work and make it a lot faster if I decided to work in clay or wood or whatever. But it seems like stone very quickly, very naturally became the material within which I could realize all my ideas.
Yeah.
It's the material that I could execute them in most proficiently.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what kind of has kept me with stone. Yeah,
Sebastian,
I'm in love with the material. I'm in love with the process. And it was the only material for me that within which I could express myself wholly and completely.
Yeah, I was thinking how Sebastian just started off, I think, with that slew of questions I asked, and he just said, well, because of, how do you phrase it? This is the most kick-ass medium, or you just wanted to, you know.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's something to it that is like, it's kind of hard to do, you know. I mean, it's not necessarily if you've become comfortable with it, but, you know, certainly all four of us would, you know, that's our material of choice. So we're opting for it. But it's, you know, if it was really easy to do, you know, everybody be doing it. And so there's something to the challenge of it, you know. And like I said, even as a little kid, I could tell that was hard. You know, like you see something that looks fluid and you know it's made out of something hard, because a little kid understands rocks. You know, like we all throw rocks in a river and bash rocks together, or squeeze rocks in a vise until they explode. If you're a little psychopathic, like I was.
Oh, yeah,
maybe not everyone does that. Was that just me?
No.
But you know, but yeah, you look at that and you're like, that is not meant to do that. You know, and I think there's something like that. So if you look at, you know, some of your work, Steve, like one of the pieces I was looking at earlier today, like the bent bone, knowing what it's meant to be, knowing what it's made out of makes it more significant. If you're looking at one of Ali's, you know, hanging dresses, it's not meant to do that. You know, stone is not meant to be a computer cord, Peter.
Yeah, tell that to the computer cord.
Right. So there's something to the challenge of it. I mean, I think that's, you know, a lot of people will say often, like, I'd like to be challenged, but do they always mean it? And I think the stone thing, you legitimately mean it, you know, trying to figure out a way to do it. So that's one of the things that's cool about the process, is every time you're trying to figure something out, at least even if it's something no one's going to notice, it's just like, there's like a little detail of something that you're trying to figure out. Like, how do I do this? What tool is going to make this form? What's going to cast the right shadow, basically, to make this texture?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing I find most fascinating about your work, Sebastian, the apparent ease with which you achieve this variety of surfaces using the same tools that I have access to. But that's you know, the teddy bear sculpture. Remind me of the name of the title of the teddy bear sculpture.
Permanent separation anxiety.
Fantastic sculpture, and the way that you have manipulated the surface of the stone to appear like, I guess it's like felt or wool. I find it incredible that you've achieved surfaces like that.
Thank you.
and the I guess the hours of experimentation that you have gone through to work out that surface. I find that sort of attention to detail in your practice particularly fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all tinkerers, right? Like we all kind of have to figure stuff out or make the right thing that's going to make the right thing. So that's part of it, certainly. I see stuff again with, that Peter has posted where he's made a certain thing that's going to sand just the interior between two keys or something like that.
Yeah. But you have to. Are you going to go to like the building supply and buy those tools? They don't exist,
Right.
But that's kind of like, that is part of the attraction to this medium, is that there are all these cool things interacting at once. There's the problem solving aspect of it, and it's like physically, like you said, Sebastian, it's kind of hard. You have to it's like physically kind of hard to do it. And then there's the element of risk. If it breaks, like there's no going back. It's a subtractive thing only. So like
right.
there are a lot of influences all the time going on when you're working on a sculpture, and that really keeps me engaged. All that stuff. Why
Hey guys,
stay there.
excuse me. Well, along the lines of this discussion, I'm seeing on the YouTube chat that there's a question.
Yeah.
First of all, Amanda is saying ha. So what I'm hearing is that you are all curmudgeons. That's great. I will own that. That's fine. Brian Barreto, thanks for tuning in, guys, by the way. Every one of you do obsessively detailed work. How do you know, in quotes, know when a piece is finished? Deadlines, getting on to new ideas, sick of it, compelled to dot every I and cross every T. And that's a great question. And that's something I was thinking about today. Because I was thinking like, well, if people don't pose questions, I wanted to ask you all things I'm curious about with your practices. And we all, I think I can say that we all mostly have made works that are connected to representation, right? And there's none of us that does purely abstract work or things that are kind of opaque in the beginning. Like there's usually an immediate read of some sort, and probably have different degrees of looseness and tightness. I'm probably maybe one of the looser guys, and then maybe Ali stops a little bit short of the place that you, Peter, and you, Sebastian, take it. So let's talk about that. Maybe let's start with the guys that really go far with it. I think Peter and Sebastian, you guys take it to a degree that are just like, Ali and I stop short of.
Should I go first, Sebastian?
Please.
I don't want to step on anyone. For me, like, I feel like if you get enough, I had a really good bit of advice from an artist I really respect, Tim Ford. Tim Ford told me, you're going to have to generalize. He was I was working on this typewriter sculpture, the first one I did in 2009. And, the thing has like 2,000 components. And he's like, you're going to have to figure out how to generalize on this thing. And eventually I sorted that out in my head. And for me, you get enough like really good, sharp detail kind of out front, and then you can get away with some other stuff. And I do include things like stray marks and sort of imprecisely rendered forms. But it's a decision you make. Like for me, I have a good eye and a not really all that great eye. So when I get a sculpture like pretty close, I look at it with my not so great eye, and I kind of get a little distance away from it. And if it still doesn't look like it's done, then I keep working on it. If it looks done to my not good eye, then I kind of let it go, because it's charming for people when they come up to a sculpture and at first they think like, whoa, this thing is like perfect. They think it's maybe cast or something. Like they have this idea that you can somehow melt the stone and cast it. But you know, once they kind of interact with it, it's charming effect because they see all these scratches and there's evidence of like how this thing was actually made by a human being with like simple tools out of a natural material. So I like to leave some of that stuff just because of the connection that it makes with people. It's a real simple endeavor, and I don't want it to be some mystifying weird thing, you know.
That's a good point. The idea of people looking at stuff and thinking it's cast, which is, I think, in part why I've erred more towards using stone with some movement in it, always some kind of strong veining or something, because while I don't necessarily want to do a whole sculpture out of a piece of, say, you know, honey onyx or something like that, where the stone really is itself just fully a painting, in my opinion, if someone looks at the sculpture and doesn't know it's made out of stone, then I've failed, because the fact that it is stone is part of the concept behind the piece. So I don't ever want to actually create something that's intended just as trompe l'oeil. So that's part of why, you know, I understand for certain things, particularly if it's a commission piece or something like that, you know, some kind of very clear stone like statuario is really, you know, what people want to see. But I think that I want something that lets people know, as Peter said, like, it's natural stone. This is a rock you're looking at. You're not looking at something that's cast. There's no chance of that happening. Because I've had people walk into a gallery before and like look at something and go, oh, towels on a wall, contemporary art, and then walk out. And so I don't want that to happen. Excuse me. I don't know if that happens to anybody else as far
That's
as.
happened to me. Somebody look at
I'm
a
sure.
styrofoam takeout box.
I was just thinking of the stack of styrofoam takeout boxes.
I've had people think that I was just some kind of smart ass that thought that was going to be, you know, somebody was just like too clever for their own good. And, you know, it's kind of funny when that happens, but also if I'm doing my job, like, they're going to engage with the work. Well, no, I got to reverse myself. I was going to say they got to engage with the work on my terms, but like, ultimately we're dead and we're working in this material that lasts for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, like, potentially. So I don't know, well, whatever terms they want to interact with it, I guess.
Let me interject, and then I want to hear from Ali. But I was working on a sculpture in New Jersey, a large outdoor monument for 9/11 victims, and the blocks were, I mean, they were stacked, but they were maybe 13 feet high by 4 feet by 4 feet, and somebody drove by in a in a pickup truck, like, you know, because it was outside in a national park. And he stepped out and he was maybe like 60 feet away. And he said, "What is that you're working? Is that like styrofoam?" And, and so,
Ask him to pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you do realize, though, I mean, to get back to your point, Peter, or maybe both of your points, I mean, we don't really have control over what it is, like, when it goes out there and inhabits the world, you know. And I guess we can put as much intention as we want in terms of whether we want that to read or to be illusory, but ultimately people are going to take it different ways. But how do you think about it, Alasdair?
Well, I've had a similar experience to all of you, where because I make work that's highly representational, people regard it with the sort of the familiarity with which they would regard the same item that they have in their own life. You know, the blouse on a hanger is dismissed because they have a blouse on a hanger at home, and why are they going to spend 5 minutes looking at mine on the wall? But I guess for me, whilst sort of counter to your point, Sebastian, where you say, if people don't know it's stone, then you failed. But if people don't know it's stone, I feel like I've succeeded, because if I've made something to look as representational as possible, as natural as possible, then the fact that it's in this formidable and extremely hard material like stone, I feel like if they do dismiss it, then I have been successful, because I enjoy the trompe l'oeil. I enjoy deceiving them for that moment, but it's when it's that moment of recognition that I wait for, when they realize it's stone, that they can then engage with it on a different level. So it's this. For me, it's like this balance of trying to not alienate the viewer by making something so familiar that they just disregard it, but also making something that does deceive them. I enjoy that.
I mean, I'm not gonna, I don't want to discount the idea of like making something that is trompe l'oeil, and that is fun. Like you said, that moment of recognition. You're talking about, I know for myself, when I was in grad school, I had been working on a series of sculptures, and my peers knew I was working on the series of sculptures. And so at our one day of the week where we met as a group, we would always eat together at the midday break. And I told everyone that I had brought dessert. And so at the end of the meal, I brought in, ice cream and a big thing of Breyers, and I set it down on the table and then waited for everyone to go for it. And it was like that moment that I knew, because what I had done was a sculpted ice cream within inside of a Breyers container of ice cream.
That's a remarkable thing.
And so I was like, okay, I got it. Like it looks right, because, a group of my peers who were sculptors who knew I was doing this had forgotten it just for a moment. Now, granted, it's ice cream, so of course people are gonna, jump on it. But there is like some certain satisfaction from that.
Yeah, you use that, or I use that. I guess we kind of all do, the four of us. We use that charisma that's intrinsic in these things that we take as models. And we kind of capitalize on that, because we all pick these pretty charismatic things that, like, I don't think any of us just do this kind of like dusty, like nostalgic kind of thing, but we do capitalize on the charisma of these things that we take as models, and that gets people hooked, because they're like, oh, I know what that is, and then they're like, like you're saying, Alasdair, you love that, like that moment when they realize that it's stone, and it's all about timing. Like they get hooked on this thing that they think they know what they're looking at, and then they realize, like, oh, whoa, this is stone, and then they kind of have to like bounce back and forth between what they thought they knew and now this new reality of this thing. But it is weird, because like for us, we're trying to work out that timing. You select this object and you select this stone because it has some activity in it, the veining, like you're talking about, Sebastian, like some veining, but not too much. You don't want it to be a dead giveaway. Right. But all we have to go on is our own perceptions of like how this is going to read and how it's going to unfold over that few seconds that someone's going to spend with it. And it just feels so great when it actually does like click through with somebody the way that you kind of thought it might.
Yeah, actually, kind of jumping off this like fine detail, what's real, what's not, in terms of this, there's a question on YouTube that kind of leads into that a little bit, where it's not just a question of, is it a real object, is it a real stone carving? Excuse me. Mackenzie C asks, are there any fictional stone works from a famous movie that are either impressive or drive you nuts? Meaning, how shitty is the stonework from different Indiana Jones movies?
Oh, he's shitty.
And it's a good point.
That's great.
I feel like it's like, do you feel like you're a doctor watching like ER or Grey's Anatomy? And you're like, no. Any particular ones stand out to you all?
In terms of what?
In terms of like, are there any movies or bits of pop culture or something like where there's, because I mean, I feel like there are even rom-coms where, of course, the lead is an artist with a loft in like lower
Ah.
Manhattan, and it's massive. And they work on stone sculptures because that's romantic, and everyone thinks it's like cool, and it looks awesome in the movies because there's that moment like where, you know, the love interest walks into their studio and catches them at work, and they're always like Tink putting the last touch on a sculpture with a point chisel and a 3-pound hammer, you know, like, no,
Yeah.
that always gets me. It's like, oh yeah, that's the final, because the sculpture's like finished, and but it's, you know, it gives
Yeah.
that like romantic kind of classic. I'm trying to think of an experiment. I mean, my wife in the other room can certainly vouch for the fact that the reality of a stone carver are far less romantic than the culture depiction.
Yeah, I think, you know, the interesting, I think the point that the question gets to, and then we should probably move, there's some other questions have rolled in, which are great. And thank you
Mhm.
everybody who's tuning in for posing these, and we'll try to, happy hour is going to go longer than an hour, as most good happy hours do. But if any of you guys, I'm talking to us four, I'm the only, well, Peter and I don't have kids. Allie's got one on the way, and Sebastian, you've got a whole thing. So if any of you have to duck out early, let us know, but we'll try to answer these. I appreciate that people are tuning in. So just to kind of put a nail on the lid on this really long and unanswerable question about when we know something is done, especially those of us who do want to do something representational, and those of, you know, you, like, for you guys who take it, for me, because I avoided the question, or I just didn't answer it, but I'm not as concerned about, I'll just say briefly that for the challenge that you mentioned, Sebastian, was a really important thing in impelling me to keep learning and learning and learning. I always wanted to know, like, how do I do that? Like, how do I achieve that? Like, it's so difficult. And I'd always ask questions, and I'd be working over in Italy around these master artisans and just be like, well, how do you do this? And, you know, I was just constantly curious. And I don't pretend, I don't know anything. It's very clear that this is a lifelong endeavor and pursuit, like from start to finish, many, many years and decades. But I will say that I feel pretty confident that I can make most anything that I might want to. Like, the how to get it done is no longer an issue. And once that kind of disappeared, I found myself personally not as interested in, like, I didn't need to do projects just to sort of like acquire certain skills or just to try to accomplish something. And so in terms of like my conceptual interests, they went in a different direction. So what did I want to say? I like, when I make something, I'm like less concerned. There is like a representational aspect of it, but I also just, you know, I'll like leave in a lot of like rough marks, even like the saw, you know, cut marks. I really like the feeling of just like that kind of visceral primal, like, you know, moment of my contact with the stone and like my imprint, and like the fact that like I made those I mean, they're all marks that we make ultimately, but it's just a particular direction that I've decided to go in with my work. But I do want to say, I do want to ask, like, you know, for maybe all three of you, or let me take Sebastian. I'm gonna ask you specifically, actually, because you
Uh-oh.
no, because and this is because I have personal knowledge into everybody else's lives. So I know that Alasdair won't like undercut the shoelaces on his shoes. Like, he's okay with like not getting into those details. Peter might do that. Peter, I feel like, has a little more time, perhaps, like to like you will take, I know you, and you will take something and just kind of do it as long as you'll do it. But Sebastian, I'm just posing this to you because I think that you're in an interesting situation where you have lots of commission work, a lot of different obligations. You know, you're going to St. Patrick's Cathedral and doing lettering, you're working on monuments, you have commissions, you have a family life. How do practical exigencies ever dictate when you stop, or is it always an aesthetic decision, like, okay, I'm done, this piece is done?
It depends on what the piece is for sometimes. So certainly with some commission work, like, there's a hard deadline, and that's just what you got to meet, and you got to get there however you got to get there. And sometimes, you know, and I'm trying to remember, I think Peter was saying, like, you can look at it with like the bad eye, or if it's far away or something. The company with whom I work a lot, Hillgartner Natural Stone in Baltimore, the president of the company will sometimes have to come and be like, Sebastian, it's going to be 20 feet in the air. Like, so there's that. So I have to keep that stuff in mind. Now with the sculptural stuff, it it really is a question sometimes where I'll realize I've spent an entire day working on the back side of a sculpture that will face a wall. So that happens. But I'm trying to remember now, actually, wasn't it you, Peter, who had said something like the last 10% of any stone sculpture is only done for other stone sculptors?
Oh, I don't know if I said that.
I feel like that was like a comment we made sometime. It may have been Steve, but I think that's kind of the truth, where there's certain things at a point that they're basically very esoteric. The average person is not going to know. They're not going to care. They're not going to know that I didn't like basically polish the underside of the button against the fabric between and a lot of that goes down to like a piece that I'd made about the idea of seeing the work. It was called Unseen, and it's like a draped cloth. But the idea is most people will only ever encounter artwork like this right now, digitally on a screen that's pixels, probably it's the size of their hand. So it really takes, you know, us wanting to get to that level because we know we did it. And hopefully that work gets shown in a gallery, you know, and I mean, I have some work up in a gallery right now, and it's been interesting, the comments I get from people that say, oh, I didn't know that was there until I was able to walk around it and get back behind the piece and put my face against the wall. And then I saw the impressions, or then I saw these marks. So that's really rewarding. Because
where is that? Just in case anybody has the opportunity to see it in person.
The Krieger Museum in DC. There's a show up there, Traces, curated by Sarah Tangi. It'll be up through January.
Great. Let me just acknowledge we have questions that we're going to try to get to. Tom Russo, we have Bill Dickinson, Jordan Clements, Allison Jean Cole, and Emily Peggs. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing anybody's name correctly, but we will try to get to your questions. And thank you for tuning in. So a question that Tom had posed a while ago, which is also connected to something that Jordan is asking about commission work. Tom asks, how much of your work is contract work for clients, and how much of your work is done on your own with the hope to sell it later? And part of Jordan's question is to that, you know, how do you mainly acquire commissions and jobs? So do we want to talk a little bit about the balance of you know, doing stuff on spec, or because we are just like in love with an idea versus like, you know, commission work, the balance in our lives, and then also how does one get a commission? Ali, start. You've been quiet. You're busy drinking scotch.
Well,
I want to hear about the shoe commissions, Ali.
Yeah, well, if people out there have seen some of my work, if you go back in the archive, you'll find a bunch of drapery sculptures that I made way back in, like.
Yeah, I think something's going on.
I know they are.
Hey, Amanda. I made a bunch of sculptures starting back in like 2012, 2013, of like drapery items and other sort of apparel. And I made all that work for my own pleasure. I lived in a cupboard at the time, quite literally, and rented out my bedroom in the flat that I have here in Edinburgh. I rented out to a friend so I could afford to pay for a studio and to pay for materials. So I just felt like I needed to make work and get work out there. It had no destination, no one commissioned it, but it was a subject matter that I was passionate about and wanted to explore. And I think that was enough for me to get going. And I felt like it was just important for me to get work out into the world. Because I was coming off of a diploma. I'd set up a studio, and I'd purchased 3 tons of limestone for £300. And I just thought, well, what am I've got to use this stuff. I've got to get work out into the world. And I just started to make, not knowing what the destination for it would be. But yeah, I think for me that was the most important thing. Just make work and put it out into the world and get people to see it. And Instagram's been fantastic for that. And I was making all this work before I was on Instagram. And so I was emailing everyone, I was putting it on blogs, and just trying to get it seen. And I guess eventually it paid off, and people started to commission me. And now to the extent that, you know, I want to honor every commission I get. I certainly don't want to turn down work, but it doesn't leave me much time to make any personal work anymore. I've been making a lot of sneaker sculptures. Which was born off of the back of this drapery theme. And I've tapped into this subculture of people who are passionate about sneakers and celebrate sneakers. And, you know, it's really been interesting to kind of connect with an audience that don't necessarily look at art in the same way that I do, or experience art in the same way that I do, but they see art in the form of sneakers, the sneakers that they're passionate about, and they see beauty in that object. And so I find it's been like quite an interesting dialogue that I've been having with these sneakerheads it came rather unexpectedly. And it's, I feel like it's been like an educational experience for me, because I now see beauty in these sort of innocuous throwaway items, these pop culture items that I didn't necessarily see before. Commissions came commissions in this particular subject matter came as a surprise to me. I never thought I'd be sort of become the sneaker guy. I sort of wanted to. I guess I had I had aspirations to be someone who made. How do I put this? It's not that my work is not serious, but I look at the work of other sculptors and think, oh, they're making real art. You know, they've got something to say through their work. I really admire your work, Sebastian, because it's got like political narratives, and all I'm doing is making sneakers. You know, I feel like there's to some extent I'm not I'm not being a real artist, because, you know, what am I saying through my work? So there's this sort of again, I'm a self-deprecating Scot, and, you know, I've got this inferiority complex. But I sometimes feel like I don't make serious work, but actually it's serious to the people who commission me. These are beautiful objects to them, and I found that to be quite an interesting dialogue.
Well, yeah, I think you're probably saying more than you think. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I think so. I mean, you were about to say the same thing, and you'll probably say it better. Well, I just want to remind Ali that your life's not over. I mean, you like to define yourself as a sneaker guy in your 30s.
Moment.
Were you going to say, Sebastian?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you're probably saying more than you think. And I mean, there's nothing wrong either with saying, you know, I got to make a living, and I have responsibilities that are coming up. So there's that too. So I get that, you know, you've got, it's hard to turn down work, but it is easy to make the work really expensive to keep the right kind of balance, or, you know, to try. I mean, I haven't found it either. But, you know, I think that even with the shoes that you're making, like, there's an, you know, implicit narrative behind that because of the material that you're working with, which is about the quality and the craft of the product that you're representing. So, of
course,
I wouldn't show you short there.
And also, it's like kind of tied into popular culture and what the actual object is and what it symbolizes, and the fetishization of that object in actual, you know, rubber and leather and then in marble. I think there's more layers than what you're acknowledging, Ali. But
well, of course, there's and there's this anachronistic quality that I love, that marble brings, and there's you know, there's the fact that they're made of marble immediately elevates, well, any object to an item of luxury, whether it's a teddy bear or whether it's a stack of polystyrene takeout boxes, all of a sudden it's a luxury object because it's made out of marble.
Sure. I mean, ultimately, all of us work with like very mundane objects and subjects that just once they're in stone, they become something else. So let me then rephrase it to the rest of us. Like, where does that balance between commission work and your own personal work come in, and then where do you find that your commission work comes from? So, Sebastian, do you want to take that?
Sure. So a lot of the commission work kind of comes from two places. So on one hand, there's commission work that just comes to me directly, and that's from people finding a website or an Instagram account or something like that, or people, I think we lost Peter.
He's had enough.
We started about talking about commission work. He's like, no, I'm out.
It is boring. No, I'm just kidding.
One of his sculptures he did recently was a commission. I want to ask him where that came from. So they kind of come through two avenues, either to me directly from one of those sources, which is almost something always online. There are some people that I've met through various in-person channels, so art fairs and stuff that I'd done in DC way back, some things I've done with the American Craft Council, which is, if you're not familiar, it's like a large kind of organization that's there to promote craft work. And then also, a lot of my commission work, particularly the less fine art stuff, so the kind of institutional work, so whether it's colleges, universities, ecclesiastical stuff, governmental work, a lot of that comes through Hillgartner, which is a stone company here in Baltimore that I know you guys are somewhat familiar with, but for anyone that's not, Hillgartner is the oldest continually operational stone fabrication company in the country.
Wow.
So they've been around since 1863. So if you're like a young and new stone carver, there's nothing you can do better than linking up with a really old company that everyone's heard of, particularly one near Washington, DC. So a lot of my work comes through that company because my studio is part of their stone shop. So I'm not an employee of the company, but I'm basically almost like a resident consultant. I'm a consultant project manager over there for certain things that require my skill set. And so that's been very synergistic in that I then am able to work with them to deal with stuff that I can't do myself. If I can't install a 1,200 pound sculpture, I can hire their field crew, that kind of stuff.
Sure. That's perfect. That's great. Well, yeah, that's a really nice relationship. And I would just add for anybody watching that is usually the stone industry, it's a tight community, and we, get our tools and we learn new tricks of the trade we artists by being somehow enmeshed with the trade, right? And, I think this is maybe a little bit different from other media where, I'm not sure how it is with painters or photographers, but we, in order to even procure stone and to buy tools and to learn aspects of the craft, we must necessarily be interacting with people in all these fields, quarry people at the stone yards, people who are selling these things, and artisans who are just purely doing, work of others or building kinds of things, right?
Right. That, I don't mean to cut you. I think though that kind of leads into, we have another question I don't want to ignore. From Allison Jean Cole that says they're a beginning sculptor, or I'm a beginner sculpting mostly by myself at home, and I worry about developing bad habits without a teacher around. Curious about what good habits you learned from the beginning that make your practice strong. And so part of that is, I was very lucky. I know you guys have worked very closely with ABC Stone there, Steve, and that is a big part of it, is working with people that know what the heck they're doing. Mm-hmm. I was very fortunate to get in with a company that had people that had been doing this stuff for quite a long time. But as far as the bad habits, I have some thoughts. I'm interested to know, particularly Alasdair and Steve, because I know you do a lot more teaching of stone carving than I do. Are there any things that you are adamant with your students from the jump about don't do this. You'll develop a bad habit by thus and such a practice. I know there's some.
Well, I'm probably going to shut out some people here from attending future courses with me, but I will say that I don't think, I mean, honestly, Peter is the example par excellence, right, of somebody who just had to figure stuff out on his own and has had remarkable results, right? And so, and I do know some people who, I do know some people who have also like been autodidactic and have achieved kind of like pretty good results. Are you guys there?
Yeah, here.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I got paranoid that I was frozen for a second. But I will say that, and I think that this transcends just sculpture, but just talking about like the relationship between technique, what the Greeks called techne, right? Just like the technical capacity to do something, and actually then being able to articulate yourself, whether it's language and like learning language skills, or playing the guitar or the piano or an instrument. Usually the people who don't really know what they're doing but still manage to achieve something remarkable tend to be like isolated examples, I would say. So for example, U2, right? A band that I grew up on. The Edge plays like a lot of just very simple single notes. There's Peter. It's rumored, I don't know if this is true, that the first guitar that he owned just had 3 strings and the top 2 were broken or something like that. That limitation just sort of like informed a little bit like of a simpler way that he was playing in the beginning, and then that just kind of fed into this style, and he made it all his own. And he might not be, as a technician, the most adroit, maybe he wasn't doing scales and all that stuff, but he figured out what he needed to do to play the music that they played, and it worked out. But I would say usually I tell people that you're kind of, if you actively sort of eschew or ignore, don't want to get involved in learning technical chops, you're handicapping yourself for being able to express yourself fully. It's better to have a large vocabulary and then just use 3 words if that is what says it all. But if you just learn those 3 words, like to get back to the language metaphor, you're always going to sound like a toddler to some extent, or you have to really work harder to make that economy of lexicon work for you. So that's a long way of saying that I would recommend that. I think, to Alasdair's point, make. You just got to be making stuff. So never let the lack of having a formal environment impede you from actually just getting yourself dirty and dusty and bruising your fingers and making stuff, because a lot of it is just in the actual like physicality of it. But we live in a day and an age where you don't have to go apprentice with somebody anymore. It's great nothing beats seeing people in person, obviously, and in-person instruction can really unclog the gears and facilitate and I think make it faster to learn. But it's very fortunate that we have all these means now that you don't even have to like order a book anymore. You can just go online. I just discovered somebody yesterday whose name, I'm going to look it up right here so I get it correct, but he's Belgian, so I don't want to mess this up. Is it Athar? Do you guys know who I'm talking about on Instagram?
Yeah. Athar, he just joined us on YouTube.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know if he's still there.
What? Wait, no, I found him yesterday. We connected.
Are you talking about his tutorials that he's been putting up?
I forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I see it as Athar Jabber. But find him on Instagram and on YouTube. It's ATHAR_JABER. So he's doing what Kelly and I have tried to do as well with Sculpting Stone, this YouTube channel that you guys are looking at, which is to put stuff out online. You can find other stuff out there, which is wonderful. Nothing, I mean, of all the formats that we have outside of in-person learning, video is for sure the best way to learn this art. You can't really, it's tough to read a book on it. So, to get back to I'm sorry, who had posed that question initially? Allison. Yes, I think that you have to find the right balance between like just working on your own and then just looking at as many expert sources as you can to learn from them. And if you have the opportunity to go study in person with somebody, then that's key.
We should probably jump onto the Zoom, which we've got a question or two on, so we don't really miss them. A question from Tom Russo is, of all the sculptures you have seen, which do you admire the most? That's a tough one. Peter, you want to take that one, or you?
And my connection's been upside down. I'm sideways right now. Can you guys hear me or see me?
You look fine from where I'm at. So
yeah.
Okay, cool. It looks crazy to me, but I'll be happy to weigh in. Can you repeat the question?
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So Tom Russo asks, of all the stone sculptures you have seen, which do you admire the most?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky one, you know.
Oh yeah, softball.
Well, let's make this quick.
In terms of my,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our favorites, you know, but like, I don't know. I kind of like, I got cut out of a big chunk. I think my connection totally failed on me for a minute. I like Bernini a whole lot. I saw Bernini's Medusa head. It was pretty great. You know, I don't know. There are a lot of things I like. I like to see somebody's virtuosity, but also just something that kind of connects with me, and that it touches on something we talked about before with the sneakerheads. You know, like they're looking at this thing. It's just this kind of normal object, but they are just freaking out about the lines. They just love it visually. And so that's different for everyone, but that's my answer. Like something that I just love visually.
Very good.
I think for me, having studied art history, there've been a couple of pretty significant moments where I've seen these iconic works in person for the first time, and having known them from books, and you know, only wondered what they looked like in person. There's no feeling quite like that. You know, the impact that you're seeing that sculpture for the first time in person has on you. And I mean, I like Michelangelo as much as the next person, but there was no feeling quite like encountering the David for the first time. Such an iconic work, and the circumstances within which I first experienced it were quite unique, because I had the whole of the academia to myself for about 5 minutes. And
did you pull that one off?
Yeah, it was like 3 days before Christmas, and I was in Florence, and yeah, there was no line at the academia, so
wow.
But yeah, I also took this trip to the Vatican once, and you know, I saw the Laocoon in person, and I saw the Apollo Belvedere in person, and these were iconic works that I studied. And yeah, I think it's something about the place that those works have in art history, and I'm occupying the same bit of space as the sculptor once occupied. I'm seeing the work from the same perspective as he experienced it as he made the work. And I think there's something about that experience that was particularly significant for me. So there's a list of all those moments.
That's good, that first intuitive response. I mean, the David, that's kind of iconic. How about you, Sebastian?
Well, I'm sorry, Peter dropped off. I was gonna, take the under on that and say I'm team Bernini in terms of David's. I feel like Bernini's David is far more impressive than Michelangelo's David, at least maybe not in scale necessarily, although it's quite a large sculpture, but in that virtuosity, its dynamism, the way it is positioned, the way it moves, and just I feel like the technical ability required to do what he did 500 years ago, to pull that off. If people aren't familiar with Bernini's David, I recommend you Google it right now. But it's, not taking anything away from Mike, respect to all the Ninja Turtles, but Bernini's, the angle of the form and the look on the face and the position of the action, so impressive. So that to me is far more interesting than, I saw them about the same time for the first time. So I remember thinking, man, why is this not and I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it's not as well known, but yeah, that's kind of where it was for me. Of course, not to take anything away from Klaus Schluter, as Emily suggests, the Well of Moses. Where was that? Where was he from? Was he Dutch? That's in France, right? Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the comments on the YouTube.
Well, let me just like show. I mean, well, I guess people. I was going to share the screen and do like David, the Bernini David, but people can look that up on their own. And in the interest of time, I'll just add my 2 cents. Did Peter jump back in for a second? I know he came in and out. He's elusive, that Peter Glenn Oakley.
He's high up in the mountains somewhere.
I can't read from here because of the light. I can't see anything. So one thing I was going to say was. I hate, Michelangelo. I hate having to come back to him because it's like cliche, It's like asking me. I always think about it like meeting you meet a writer at a cocktail party, and you're like, oh, what do you think of Shakespeare? It's just like, it's like the thing, right, that people go to. But
that's like telling a car guy, it's like, oh, you like cars? You must love Henry Ford.
Right, exactly. But with for me it is it's there's the list is long, but Michelangelo's day sculpture in the Medici Chapel is something I just keep coming back. I mean, I guess one of the reasons that's like seared into my mind is that I saw it in pictures, and then I've seen it in person probably more than 24 times, because I would just go annually and multiple times, take students there, and every time I see those sculptures in that basement area, I see them in a different way, and I don't think that that's easy to do. I mean, you change as a person and an artist, obviously, we're all doing that, but those works are really complicated. For me, they're unfinished for anybody who doesn't know them, and they were done at a time when he could have finished. He wasn't abbreviated in his timeline because of any practical needs, and it was also a time period where there wasn't this aesthetic of like the unfinished that he helped sort of pioneer inadvertently. And so I think that it's unintentionally revolutionary in different ways, and also just complex. I think it's from a practical standpoint, the realization of them, and then just conceptually, those are very complex works. And the one that I'm drawn to is the Figure of Day.
Well, actually, since we're in the Renaissance right now, can I hop back over to a question from the YouTube feed? Excuse me. Oh, we got you back. So Emily Pigu, I think I'm pronouncing that right, asks, the idea of failure is an interesting one. I just heard an academic conference on this in Renaissance art. Could you talk about failure, whether in flawed materials or adapting when something goes awry?
I love that question.
That's a good one. But it also assumes we make mistakes, and that's impossible. So that answer?
Yeah, well, the thing to do is you have to smash those things and destroy them completely so nobody knows that you made a mistake. It just seems like you're taking forever.
There you go.
But like the failed attempts, just like, if you have something you want to put out into the world, you put that thing out into the world. If it If it's something else, then like, I don't know, maybe you can start over with the same piece of stone on a different idea.
Mhm.
Well, I've recently finished a sculpture that had some naturally occurring pock marks in it.
Was that the one
Imagine-
you talked to me about, Ali? In that the voids, little voids in it?
Yeah, there's some.
Yeah.
I've experienced a couple of recent projects in stone that has had these. It's like a slight aeration. There's like bubbles, slight air cavities, and they're tiny. They're almost. I mean, no one else would notice, but because I know they're a problem. And it takes a lot to overcome the need to fill or to try and kind of file out, remove some of these naturally occurring inclusions. And it's something I struggle with because I'm a perfectionist, and I feel like those inclusions detract from the finished sculpture. But I think it also is, I'm afraid of having to justify the presence of those naturally occurring inclusions to a client who expects something to be perfect. I think, Sebastian, you work in a lot of reclaimed material, and presumably you find a lot of compromised stone, and yet you make beautiful work with it. How do you overcome the stone problems within the stone that has occurred through, I guess, 100 years of exposure to the elements?
Yeah, so there's definitely that in the surface of the stone when you're talking about the exposure to the elements, for sure. But honestly, a lot of the damage to the material that I work with comes when it's been dismantled. So, they tear a building down, it's fallen, it's hit the ground, and so there are fractures and fissures and stuff that it might not be apparent initially. So I try not to fight those too much. If I can find them, I'm going to break that apart so that I don't end up with, a fissure running laterally through a direction of stone that's a projection. But, yeah, on that level too, again, a lot of the stone that is weathered, I'm carving away most of that surface. And if I'm not, I'm leaving it and it's part of the sculpture. So to me, that's part of the sculpture. It's almost always part of the idea behind it. So I want it there. But yeah, it's like when you're dealing with something else for a client, they're looking for a stone that is particularly sincere, and that is harder to find, or you've got to be very clear about it. Going, back to Steve talks about our general lexicon. That's basically where that term comes from. Is fine. When someone signs a letter, sincerely so and so. I don't know if you guys have heard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. The sincera.
Yeah.
That's.
Explain that for viewers.
The idea. So sincerely is the English version of senza cera, which means without wax, which is basically a way that a stone was described if it didn't need filling back in the, say, Renaissance days, where they didn't have, contemporary epoxies and stuff like that. So if I found a pockmark, or when I do repairs and restoration work, I'm filling it with an epoxy. But back in the day, they basically had wax to fill a crack or a pockmark in a stone. So if they had a stone that was so true that it was fully filled, it did not require any filling, it was considered senza cera, sincere. So when someone signs a letter sincerely, they're saying essentially truly, or truly yours. Same thing.
That's interesting. I know a different etymology or apocryphal beginning to that. The sine cera was, from my understanding, but they both make sense, and they're just different facets of the same.
I should probably state what I just told you was utterly legend based on stuff other carvers and things that I've learned from.
No, that's what I've learned, but I think this is worth investigating, and those of you watching maybe can just perform research and correct us later with a message. But what I learned is that sine in Latin, without, cera cera, cera in Italian, without wax, was because when you went to get work done in a Roman sculpture workshop, you could either get a true polish, which was going to cost more, right, sine cera, or you could have sort of like a cheaper polish, which was just to get
Wax.
it close, then to wax it up and to buff it, you know, which was going to cost a lot less, because if any of you don't know, actually polishing takes a long time to get it to you know, especially back then. I don't know what they had for materials, but either way, that's interesting. I mean, with failure, I think about it as always. It's funny, and I'm sorry if this is going to be a disappointing answer to Emily. I don't mean to be evasive. I don't connect it to actually like the material the consequences of, like, you know, the material breaking. You know, it's all about intent, you know, like, because once I started working with materials that are colored, you know, like some onyxes and other stones, the breakage and the reassemblage with epoxy is just like part of the game of that, because they're constant. Like, you just know going in, okay, well, this might very well fracture, and then you just kind of like reassemble it. And I don't feel purist in that sense. Like, I gotta like throw it away. But I do understand, you know, that idea. For me, it's about like, if some, you know, and this doesn't happen as much anymore, but it's like, if I fail, I feel like it's like I'm pushing this piece and it's not happening, you know, and you just feel it. It's like, it's not emerging the way you want it to. But I have been in that situation where I've been working on a piece, maybe it was for a client or a commission, and then there was like some flaw or chip. And in that sense, where some of the definitions for the outcome were placed before you started, you know, you're not direct carving it, but you got to make something very specific. Yeah, I mean, the first thing for me is just like try to reform it if I can without gluing, you know, if I can reshape it and make it work. And then, you know, I'm not like, if something can be glued on and it's not, you know, sometimes you could get away with it if there's veining or whatever. I'm not like opposed to Frankensteining something together. And it's not because of like, oh, I don't want to start from scratch, I have to buy a new piece of stone or whatever. But it's also like bound up in the idea of like, I do feel like it's like a respect or a reverence for this stone that has been kind of like in the ground for hundreds of millions of years and has been extracted with great difficulty and danger. And if I can make it work, I just don't want to like just toss it, even though ostensibly it's just going back in the ground where it came from. You know, I don't know. I try to push it as far as I can with a piece. I don't know. Did Peter? Did you get the question, or were you?
Yeah. No. I finally untangled my connection issue. I guess everybody can hear me. I'm back on the thing. I don't feel at all bad if say I get my hands on a piece of stone and it's not very easy species of stone to get, and it's what I have, but it has a flaw in it. I might just smack it with a dead blow hammer and exploit the weakness in it, and then epoxy it back together, and then do my sculpture. And if I do something like that, like, I don't feel bad about that at all. It feels pretty honest to me, you know, like if in the course of the work I make a bad mistake and I have to like glue something back together or like fill some hole and then recarve it, it's like kind of like, it just kind of bungles up the purity of the concept that I had to start with, and I don't feel great about it, you know? So like I don't know, it's something like, if you're super committed on some project that you've spent like a year on, and you make some minor error and you have to do a repair, it's like, you know, I mean, maybe you do it because like, who is really going to care about that, you know? But like, if it hurts your feelings, like, that's got to be your metric. If you can't live with it, like, you just have to just accept, like, okay, well, I have a smaller piece of stone here to use for something else in the future. I need to source a different piece of stone to do this idea, you know? That's my take on the failure thing. Failure's part of it. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to wrong-headedly work for 15 minutes or, you know, 15 days, and we're going to make mistakes sometimes. And sometimes it's recoverable and sometimes it's not recoverable.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that comes with pushing the material, like some of the stuff you're working on with, in particular, like I was saying, like these exposed chords and all these kind of things. Do you, when you're working on those, do you leave, intentional kind of ligatures or stems or things? Do those come out, or do any of them survive into the final piece?
Well, it's funny. I had a conversation with our buddy Fred about that in 2018. Steve, what is Fred's last name?
Yeah, Fred X Brownstein. He is an American carver based in Vermont who studied and trained and worked professionally in Italy for over a decade, maybe 15 years, before coming back and establishing his practice. He's a master.
Yeah, Fred is a master, and we talked about that, about the little bridges, like support bridges and stuff, and we've seen them in Bernini. There's a bridge in Bernini's David. In the sling, there's a tiny little bridge in there, and Fred is like, it's your call. Who is going to naysay? Like, it's your sculpture. Who knows more about your sculpture than you? If you think it needs that bridge, just leave it in there, and like eventually it disappears visually. I have left a couple of them.
I just want to mention, just for viewers who might not know, the bridge would be like if you were carving fingers outspread like this, you might leave a little bridge of stone in here, while you're carving most of it before you eventually remove those. And we're talking about consciously leaving those in.
Yeah. If you're looking, if you know your stone, you know how it sounds, you know how it feels, you know the strength of it. If you're looking at this thing and you're like, okay, if I cut this bridge out of this, then the ring finger is going to fall off. Like, you have to leave the bridge, and like maybe your initial vision was this hand like this with no bridges in there, but like what's the bigger error, to have a little bridge in there or to have missing a finger later?
If you want to see some examples of this, if you want to see some examples of the bridge, check out Sebastian's Instagram feed. He's got lots of examples of bridge work as he's carving delicate pieces, like hands that he's carved for restoration projects on figurative sculptures. He's left lots of little bridges there, so if you want to check out some of those on his Instagram channel, you'll get a visual impression of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's funny. Wanted to try something here, if I can.
You share your screen.
I can share my screen and actually show an example of what we're talking about, if you like. Let me give it a shot. If anyone's not, see if this works, of course. So can everyone see this right here?
Yeah.
That's a bridge. So this is, of course, Bernini's David, which, again, my favorite. But that right here, that bridge, that's a bridge. That's what we're talking about. All it is a supporting structure in between, essentially, the two braids of that sling. And now we're back.
Cool.
So yeah, did I? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought we lost Peter. Yeah, I don't know. So you're right. I leave the bridges in for the working time, for sure. But by the end, I always kind of want to take them out. And it's funny, I tested this not tested on purpose, but I had an example of this, because I feel like the bridge takes away from the experience. And I was working on a restoration piece recently, and I had basically a bird's head coming out, and there was a beak, a very fine beak, and it was projecting. And so I had a bridge going from the end of the beak to the chest of the bird. And so I get out there and I'm working on this restoration, and the client, comes by to see everything. And of course they want to, I'm just putting this in, and oh, there you go. So yeah, there used to be, I don't know if people can see my cursor, but there used to be a bridge from the tip of that bird's beak to its chest. Yep, right there. And so that was in when the client came up, and of course they wanted to see the bird, because this was kind of a feature piece of the sculpture. It was the closest thing to the, the viewer as they pass it, that kind of thing. And plus, as you can see on the left, most of the bird was gone. So when I just kind of held it up there to show them where it was going, as I had removed, what I needed to replace it. And the first thing they said was, well, what's that little thing from its is that gonna be there? And I was tempted for half a second to be like, yeah, is that a problem? I'm gonna leave it. Looks good, right? But no, of course, I was like, no, it comes out. And in fact, I guess actually now I realized I had put it in there already. So I made sure to basically get that out of there by the end of that day. Because, I didn't want it there. It was never part of it, but it was definitely a distraction. It was the first thing they said, so I was like,
That's funny.
all right, definitely going ASAP.
That's great. So there's two things I want to talk about. I'm also sensitive to everybody's time. We've been going an hour and a half. By the way, if you're still watching on YouTube and Zoom and you want to see more of these, and we can schedule this again in the future, just write to us. I think there's like endless topics. I love just talking to you guys about this stuff. But two things I want to address before was one question that's outstanding. And then I want to get back to restoration. And you think you know where I'm going with this. But Allison, no, I'm sorry, Jordan Clements asked, how important do you think drawing skills are for stone carving? I think we can be brief with this. I think that they're fundamental, but I also know that Alasdair doesn't come from a drawing background necessarily. And so I don't know about what you guys think about it. I think it's very helpful. Maybe not fundamental, but I feel like it's been very helpful for me.
For my part, I think it's absolutely fundamental, and I have zero grasp of it.
You can measure your way to a sculpture, right? Without.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at measuring things, but I've done since I started, I've done 2 good drawings. And I've tried a bunch. It's really, really, really challenging. It's why I'm a sculptor instead of a drawer, because it's much easier for me to make the shape out of the material and then it casts a normal shadow. It's really, really hard for me to make a mark that looks like a shadow. That is a failing on my part, and I do think that drawing is fundamental. And I have this sporadic practice where I continue to try to learn to draw. It's important to be a dressed person, but it's hard for me.
Yeah, I can identify there. I mean, I wish I had those skills myself, but I will confess I don't commit as much time or any time to practicing. Yeah, I measure a lot. And I find that I can find the object just in 3 dimensions through measurements, and without having to draw on drawing skills. But I will say that I think I miss out on a lot of conceptualizing of work. I think I could, if I had drawing skills, I would design far more works. I think my lack of drawing skills is in detriment to my broader practice. So, not coming from a drawing background, I would say to anyone listening, learn drawing skills. I wish I had them.
Seb?
Me too.
Well, actually, yes, Steve, do you do a lot of drawing and sketching and stuff? Because actually, as we were coming up with questions for each other, although people have chimed in a lot, I had meant to ask you a question about journaling and sketching and what you do on that level because of some of the writing I know you do, but is the drawing and the sketching part of your process?
Yeah. It's funny. I feel bad because in recent years I've done less drawing than I had in the past. I used to draw incessantly, and I find that I do journal and draw, not on a daily basis, but when it's for sculpture, I find myself now just kind of being hasty. Like the drawings are sloppier, they're cruder, they're inchoate, but because I know how different it is, it's almost like I just will do some sketches but it's almost like impatience to get to the material, and I know the limitation, sometimes you just have to make, well, I just do it for myself because, I do like to draw, but sometimes you have to present an idea to like a client or somebody, and you don't want to commit to material, or you don't want to, you're not going to carve it or make it in clay. But it's harder now. having sculpted for so long, you realize like how the drawing doesn't convey really, you know, what the marble or whatever is going to contain. So, you know, I don't want to digress too much. I think it's been important, and it's been a love of mine, but I don't do it as much as I used to. But on the other hand, my sketchbook, like I do not want to, I sometimes have like these panic attacks, like thinking I've lost it or left it somewhere. Like there's so many things of like more material value that I would rather lose first before my sketchbook.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think drawing's part of the practice, certainly for commission work. And I know that's always the case. I don't know about you all. Maybe people just have more faith in you than me, which is possible. But I feel like in almost every case when I've done a commission sculpture, you know, I have to present a drawing first. I mean, I could tell them what I want to do, but it's like, I got to draw this thing out. So they have some sense of where I'm headed with this. And that's not a bad thing whatsoever. You know, I've been very lucky with certain commissions where on a couple of occasions, people who have said, you know, we like this series. Do you have some other idea in it? Or what do you want to do? But the only way for me to convey that effectively is to draw it out. And this would be true for anything from a sculpture, fine art with a FA, or a memorial or a tombstone or something. I've got to draw something. And I really don't know how to use AutoCAD, so I'm going to have to get in there with a pen and pencil. So that's kind of part of it. And I mean, that was my background initially. That's really kind of always part of my process, is the researching, then drawing, then finding reference. You know, I'm really still an illustrator fundamentally. I just happen to be working in stone mostly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. You know, I can connect with that because like when I said earlier that I think drawing is fundamental to my sculpture practice, but like woefully, like I don't do it. And I like, at this point, it's true that I can't do it. You know, the thing is for me, like this work, it's not necessarily representational. Like, I work from a model, but you know, like this, say the sculpture of the sewing machine that I did, like I have a sewing machine as my model, but when I shut my eyes and think of a sewing machine, it's like way more of a sewing machine in my head than the thing actually looks like. And that's how I'm going to do the sculpture. So like I measure very carefully from the model, but I'm like, that's a little spindly. I'm going to fatten up that dimension because this is how I want it to look, like every dimension from the model. So it's certainly not a one-to-one thing. Like I push all my measurements in a certain direction. And I think, and this, what you said just then, Sebastian, about like preparing somebody for what their commission is going to look like. If I could draw, I could show them like, this is the sewing machine I have in my head, you know? But, you know, since I have a few sculptures under my belt, I can just I can show some people, if they're interested in something from my hand, I can say like, here's the model I worked from on this particular sculpture, and here's how the sculpture turned out. And they can kind of see which direction I might push it. And it was pretty hard to start out. Like, but, you know, on the surface, it is just representational, and that's enough to get people through like the first 6 months of living with the thing. After a while, though, it starts to grow in your mind, and you're like, oh, wow, maybe he was going for something other than that, you know? And my collectors have great faith in me, which is awesome.
Yeah. So, well, I was curious about that, both with how you generate some of the works that you've done, and also, I guess, the subject matter. Are you, by and large, picking the subject matter for your works? Are you doing, because I think we actually addressed this before and kind of bounced off of it, but are you doing most of that work on spec, or are you getting, I think you'd said you're getting some commissions from those things. Are you picking the subject matter, or is this something that they were particularly interested in, or is it kind of something where you're meeting somewhere in the middle? They had an interest in something you had already done something like.
Sometimes there's a bit of a conversation where we come to something together, but I have, as you can imagine, and I'm sure it's true for all of us, like I have a pretty long list of stuff I want to do. And typically if a collector is coming to me, then they know my work, and they know like this is probably right down his alley. Like if a collector comes to me with an idea for a commission, it might already be on my list. If it's already on my list, I'm like, yeah, that's already on my list, and here we go. Sometimes a collector will come to me and it's already something I've begun. Like it's just sitting on a shelf. Like I've worked on it for a few weeks or something, and then put it away. Sometimes a collector has an idea to push like my oeuvre in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. Like and I hate to have to say no to somebody, but you guys know I did a series of styrofoam takeout boxes. I had this really cool collector that came to me that wanted a smashed up styrofoam takeout box, and I just didn't want to do it. I told him no, and it was terrible to have to turn that down. But like, I don't find that thing to be beautiful, and it's not something I want to do. And there's so many things that I do want to do, and but yes, chances are for collectors coming to me with an idea, like it's probably on my list anyway. And let's do it.
Well, let me ask therefore, if anyone's been approached by a client with a terrible idea, but you haven't had a commission in 6 months, and like you really want to get some work. So what do you do? Do you take the work, or do you try and manipulate their idea into something that you think is cool, or do you suck it up and do the work?
Well, can I just say, I want to mention something that, historically, and I think all of us, I don't know if it's a specific thing for stone sculptors, but I have a feeling that because it's such a weird, esoteric practice, that all of us are inclined to be looking at history a little bit more closely than maybe some other genres. I don't want to be too presumptuous, but also because to unlock the enigmas of like, how did these people do what they were doing? And so it's been interesting for me to, look at the past, and it was only relatively recently in history that we have this idea of like this sort of like bohemian artist who just like picks and chooses and creates things from the ether purely from their own volition. I mean, a stone shop in the Renaissance, they would do anything, whether it was a mantelpiece, a hearth, someone paid you to make a whatever it happened to be. And you might have people in your shop who would take care of simpler things. And if you're the master, maybe you're doing the more complicated things. So I think, I don't know, I think maybe this is a little different than what you're asking, Ali, like doing sort of like, the kind of like grist for the mill kind of stuff, like, oh, let's do this restoration job, which brings in some bucks, as opposed to like, hey, could you make me like a bust of, such like a hip hop star, just because I want that in my house, and it's something you really don't want to do, or it's not in your wheelhouse, but it's going to bring in money. That I don't know, like that's a subjective thing. I think it's hard enough to make a living in this field that there's no such thing as sort of like prostituting yourself in that sense. I mean, if you need the job and you need the work, and it's going to facilitate your being able to pursue your own creative work after that job, that finite thing is done, then I say go for it. If it's going to shackle you to like an ongoing thing that really compromises your ability to pursue your, like, I've done jobs where I've been like working as an assistant for somebody, and I just didn't have time to do my own stuff after that. And like there, you have to start to make maybe more critical decisions. That's my 2 cents.
Well, for me, there's a lot of bread and butter stuff that won't pollute my body of work. If somebody wants, for example, I know this is not just true for me, but if somebody wants some inscription work, boom, yeah, okay, no problem, because that like there's no way that's gonna like, there is no conceptual thing for me to do an address marker for someone's house that's going to question like the conceptual integrity of some of these other sculptures that I've done. Not like the example I gave of the crushed up styrofoam box. That's just kind of like it just somehow resonates wrong with me, and I don't want to put that in that same category of these sculptures that I do feel very strongly about, that I've thought carefully about and kind of like audition them for months before I even started them, spend all this time. But, you know, like, so inscription work is a great way to pay the bills and not mess with your oeuvre. Or like for me, I'd rather build a fireplace in somebody's home than to do a sculpture that I didn't feel great about. So
Sure, but you can keep those things separate from your name, right? Like you can do sort of, right. I think that's important.
yeah.
It's a tricky line. I mean, I've carved some names into things I wasn't particularly proud of, but the thing that I keep in mind is that that work is essentially sponsoring the work that I want to do for me, because, you know, I don't, you know, you guys have different situations and stuff like that, but when I'm doing a sculpture that's my own work, something that was not commissioned, you know, so if I'm doing something that no one has said they're going to buy, which is most of my fine art initially, I'm basically telling my family I am taking an unpaid vacation for a certain period of time to do this thing that daddy wants to do. So I've got to feel pretty strongly about doing it. But as Peter was saying, it's like, yeah, the you know, things like inscriptions and letter carving and that kind of stuff, architectural work certainly will pay the bills in between that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I imagine, Sebastian, on the level that you're working with inscription work, that's got to be pretty rewarding. I've never done anything as lofty as the inscription work that I've seen that you're doing, etc.
Yeah, I should not sell it as though I don't. I legit enjoy it. I actually enjoy that work. Although, to be fair, by the time on a certain project I've gotten to like the 400th letter, I'm like, okay, a little. But, you know, it depends on the job, and it depends on the location, you know, and there's some places where it's amazing to work on these things. And there's certain buildings, there's certain, you know, people, like last summer, as you guys know, I spent the whole summer at the Eisenhower working with, you know, Nick Benson and Paul Russo. And that was far and away one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had, because those guys, you know, I trained with people like, you know, Tim Johnson and Early Wheeler and Kevin Herringer. They're top of their game and they've been in DC forever. But working with another stone shop on that level was incredible. And so being able to work with them was a true opportunity. So yeah, I'm not saying that work's not rewarding, and that work really was rewarding, especially like looking at the stuff we were doing and reading the inscriptions we were inscribing into the wall, and how I felt about them personally, which mattered not at all, to be clear, but doing all that work against the backdrop of what was going on in our country at the time. You know, I carved like 300 letters during the impeachment hearings about about Eisenhower, or rather what Eisenhower said regarding the military industrial complex. It was quite a contrast.
That's phenomenal. Hey guys, we're coming up on 2 hours. This has been amazing, but there are like 10 other topics I've been wanting to talk to you guys about. Should we, I was thinking maybe we could wrap it up on a question. I mean, I could keep going, but Ali, it's like 12:30 for you.
Oh, sorry.
The rest of you. I mean, like,
I forget the time change there, or time shifts over there, Ali.
Okay, we do have a question here actually coming in on YouTube. Can you all mention a work? This is from Crysec2727 or Crykek. Can you all mention a work that you've made which is most important to your creative development, one that is closest to your heart, not necessarily one you're most known for? Maybe mention why. Thanks. That might be a great one to end on.
All right, well, why don't we start with Ali, because he's probably getting pretty tired.
No, I'm good. I'm probably good for another half hour if it goes that way. But I guess if I look at my own body of work, I generally work on a scale that my own studio can accommodate. So I'm working on blocks of stone that I can lift onto the workbench myself, for the most part. So at the most, I'm working on like 30 or 40 kilo blocks of stone at the most. Sneaker sculptures come in like blocks this size. So I'll cut them like down at ground level, then I'll lift them up. So I'm working on a manageable scale like that, predominantly. And because my work is representational, it's the scale of the object that I'm trying to portray. But I made this wedding dress sculpture back in 2014 when I did a residency at the Vermont Carving Studio. And that was of a scale that I had very little experience. I'd worked on blocks of stone of that scale, but never on my own work. And I guess I'd never been charged with the responsibility of completing a piece of that scale by myself, and to be wholly responsible for the outcome. And so to go from working on this very small scale to suddenly working on a 9-ton block, that was a baptism by fire for me. But I felt like I would never have had the opportunity to achieve work of that scale because no one would commission me, because my body of work does not would not give a client the confidence that I could achieve a project of that scale. But doing a residency where materials are provided, and I guess there is spaces given to work out problems, and to kind of I'm losing my train of thought here. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that being thrown into a project of that scale was very informative to me in that moment. It allowed me to that experience that I can take forward. I can present myself to a client. I can show that I've achieved work of this scale, but it also gave me the confidence in knowing that I could achieve a large scale sculpture within a given amount of time to a high degree of finish. It was a particular mile marker that I had to cross at some point, and the residency in Vermont allowed me to achieve that.
Good. You guys, memorable pieces or things that were significant to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick one, you learn a little bit from each project that you undertake. But I appreciate Chrysec 2727's question. Like to try to nail down one piece that really is like maybe a turning point or in contrast, sort of, I'm just like just to be in contrast to what Alasdair just said. I did an individual condom in black jade at one point, and so it's this tiny little sculpture. It's exactly life size, pretty much. And jade, as you guys know, it's really hard. I have worked in marble for a long time, but jade is like it's so much harder. It's as hard as quartz crystal. So if you take your normal stone, your marble carving tools, and try to make a mark on the jade, it's like drawing on it with a pencil. There'll be a line of steel on the jade, but it won't scratch the jade. Like jade is really hard. And so I had to adapt, and you only work with diamond tools. And if you picture like an individual condom in the wrapper, there's really fine detail, like the serrations where the plastic is torn on the edges, and then like the softness of the whole thing, which is totally different than what I usually do. These kind of like nice straight flat planes and everything is typically like what my work comprises. But So it was just a big learning experience for me. And it was such a challenge to make something that's like visually arresting and conceptually significant, but it's so small and also so difficult to actually achieve, like physically. That jade condom was like a pretty big turning point for me. Black jade.
You, Sebastian?
Well, I guess if they say a piece that you're not well known for, that's a good one too, because I think a lot of times,
Not necessarily. Yeah.
sorry, yeah, right.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
People know us for various things, and so a lot of people, ask me like, what's the next, soft thing you're going to carve in stone? But let me see if I can. I did this piece somewhat recently, and this was the first piece I'd ever done that involved typography as part of a fine art piece. And it was something that I was interested in doing because it was a kind of a news story that went in and out of the news real quick when the current administration advised people grant writing for the HHS and the CDC not to use these words in their grant writing. And this seemed to me very much like things I'd read about in science fiction books as a child. And so the idea behind the piece of basically finding a way to take words that were being taken away and inscribe them in a stone, to me felt like the most permanent thing ever. And I've spent most of my career carving letters on one level or the other, but it had never incorporated itself into the artwork before. And the thing about the stone you're looking at is that, of course, the stone itself is this. It looks very, very dirty. And it is, because the stone was an imposing stone from a lithography printing press. And so what was kind of cool about the material was that I was able to later take the stone, lay it flat. And the story behind it is these two guys right here gave it to me. Joe here got this stone from his father, or excuse me, Joe's father got the stone from his father, no longer living, because his father found it outside of a decommissioned printing press in Baltimore City. Joe was an art student, knew me, had this stone because his dad had it sitting around the house for decades. This was in the 1970s when they first got it. And so the stone came to me through Joe because he knew of my work and said, hey, are you interested in this piece? And of course, at the time I said, absolutely. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Still weighs about 200 pounds. And so using this stone to carve these words allowed me basically to turn it into a method of printing again by making that imposing stone, which was used for reproducing letters, turn into something that we are commonly used to seeing on, like, tombstones, where you are taking rubbings and representing the words that are carved into them via that method of taking a rubbing. So to me, that piece is particularly important, not just because of what it represented, but because of the story behind the material itself.
That's great.
That's a great piece.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
Thank you.
That's really great.
I love narrative like that. And you guys are great, like Sebastian especially. There's a narrative to your work that I just admire so much.
Thank you. So Steve, what's the standout?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. As everybody, all of you know, and I'm sure people watching know, like every piece teaches you something, and it's hard to identify. I'm sort of like, well, what lesson, what was sort of like a big lesson? I don't know. I kind of hate, in a way, I hate to kind of draw attention to this because it's like such a juvenile work. It's not part of my current aesthetic or anything, but I did work on this monument in New Jersey that was a tribute to people who had been killed in the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. And the reason it was, like, I don't want to get all like sentimental, like, oh, it was a memorial because of this, attack. And it's not the sort of like, perverse romanticism that could be associated with memorialization. But for me, it was really significant because it was I was like living in Italy when 9/11 happened. And my home area of New Jersey was impacted to a significant degree because many people in the part of New Jersey where I grew up, which is Monmouth County, died because they were commuting to New York to work there. And so I think, I think New Jersey had almost 800 deaths, of the total of that day. And my home community, just my tiny town, that I grew up in, had 8 people who died. And then the county had another 150. And so we all knew people, like, my family had, we had family friends who lost people in the towers. And so when I was fresh back from Italy, when I started working on that, and it was a real community. I had no idea how I was going to do it. It was all volunteer. We just, I volunteered my time. Everybody who contributed to it in some way with in-kind donations. The stone came from Vermont quarries. They donated the stone, and it was just really about this moment, the very, very specific moment in time, and the way that people, but their generosity and the sentiment behind this sort of this community initiative, that it was just like the piece is just bound up in my memory of that time and the collaboration with different people. And I wanted to sort of like make it open source to a certain degree, not that it would be chaotic in terms of the design, like I designed it, but I had people come down who had lost loved ones and like participate, pick up a hammer and chisel and just kind of work on the piece. Or people would come down and like be in the abrasion stages, the abrasive stages, like where they were using rocks and sandpapers and files and things. I'd let them work on it, and people would just come back repeatedly. And some people would say that it was like the first time they had something tangible that they could do in the wake of this loss, where in most cases they didn't even get remains back. Like their loved ones went off one day and then just didn't come back. There was no goodbye. And so that was just sort of like a kind of a grounding experience for them. And I think that for me, when that project ended and I just saw that people were going and like leaving mementos at its base, and like articles of clothing that had once belonged to loved ones, and candles, and like I was like, oh my, like I just, for me, like having something, no longer be mine and just like inhabit the public space and just be owned by other people and interpreted by other people in another way was really impactful going forward. Even though like, you don't really get many chances to do stuff like that, really, unless you make your career about making public work. But that resonated with me.
Yeah, hardly juvenile. That was a beautiful piece. I think maybe earlier in your career, but yeah, and if nothing, I mean, the scale alone was really, really impressive of that. I remember seeing it way back when.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I think juvenile, just in terms of like, you think about like where your head was artistically, and also even my abilities. I had people, my 2 teachers in Italy came over, and they helped me make it. I was just, how many months into carving, there's no way I could have done that on my own. Ironically, I picked it up again like 10 years later before we actually installed it permanently. It sat for a while we were trying to figure out where it was going to be placed. It's in Highlands, New Jersey. And then I just, I went back in and I worked on it for a few months, just because I had grown over those 10 years as an artist and as a sculptor, and and changed some things, to make it something I could live with, once I knew a little bit more about anatomy and all the rest. But yeah, so that's that. But let me just briefly ask you guys before we close this. Life in quarantine, sculpture in this last year. Either address that, if you would. I'm curious, like how that's affected your practices, or how if it's impeded, enhanced your practice, made any difference at all, and or what are you working on now that excites you? So whatever one of those questions you want to take, I'd be curious to know. Peter.
Oh yeah, me. Poor me. Like quarantine stuff for everybody, but like I've been lucky. I haven't had anybody really close to me that's been touched by COVID or anything. So like I just have the typical like, wow, this is a bummer, the bars are closed. Or even if the bars are open, it's kind of a bummer. I can't just like go out to the bars or whatever. And not that I'm like big for like the bar scene, but it's nice, in a solitary kind of endeavor like stone sculpture, to be able to go out and hang out with some people and blow off steam. And so it has made it a little bit more difficult for me to go into my studio knowing it's going to be solitary before I go in there. It's going to be solitary after I get out of my studio. But it's just the typical COVID thing that everyone is dealing with. The project that I'm working on right now, I'm pretty psyched about. If I can just keep from being stir crazy, like I love the idea. I'm carving a camera out of black marble, and it feels really good. I love the idea. I'm just heaps stir crazy because there's like no social outlet to blow off steam like everybody else. So pretty vanilla complaint.
Yeah, my complaints are just like, I don't know, go on any blog and find some parent complaining about being home with children during quarantine. Like, that's my list. That's it. I'm not, any different than anyone else, other than, now we have, 2 kids and one has started daycare again. So he goes there, but we have an 8-year-old who's in school. And so that is far and away harder on my wife because the 2 of them are essentially office mates now. And, we all know how office mates can get. And so they're both doing great, but it is a lot harder on her. I know, like, I'm very lucky to have a crap ton of work. So that's a difference. I know a lot of people that were in various industries that were decimated by this. So that's, if you were in something in entertainment, anything with group gatherings, bars, restaurants, waiters, waitresses, that kind of thing, that is really tough. I'm not experiencing any of that. So I'm very lucky. I'm basically way behind because the initial part of the shutdown and all that stuff kind of shut down a lot of stuff for me too for a while. So I was, already like a little bit behind, and now I'm months behind. But yeah, I've got a handful of various projects I'm working on. When I can talk about, I'm working on a memorial piece that's doesn't sound interesting, but it's a really interesting bench, and it's been in the works for years. And so it took a long time to literally find the right boulder for it. So now that we finally found it, I'm enjoying finally getting to break stuff.
That's great.
Steve, Ali,
would you just wait, before we move on to Ali, could you just describe for everybody? It's a rough stone that you've intervened in, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah. So it's for a woman who is getting a green burial, which is like the most natural of all types of burials. And she wanted everything to be very natural, and meaning like basically they'd dig a hole in the ground, they'd cover you in a cloth, they put you in it, done. No vault, no coffin, nothing. And so she wanted the memorial for this to be something that matched that psychologically. And so it took a very long time to find something that met the size requirements we needed for it and the aesthetics. And Steve, I think you and I talked about this ages ago. I eventually found something somewhat nearby, which was great because she didn't want it coming from very far away. But yeah, so basically it's creating a kind of like seated area out of this large boulder that will also, contain amongst some aesthetic elements, also, some inscriptions and things like that.
Cool. Ali, how about you?
I've been affected by. I've not been affected by COVID to the same extent as many other industries, like Sebastian was saying. But I'm very fortunate that I have my own studio within a stone yard that itself was closed for whatever it was, 12, 15 weeks. But I still had the key and I was still able to go in. So I had run of the place for a good 3 or 4 months. And I was extremely productive. And I've, in some strange way, the interest in my work of late has really gone up. And so now certainly for the period of COVID, I was inundated with commissions. It's that point in that every independent practitioner hopes for their entire career. And so yeah, very fortunate to have had a lot of work of late. I'm now I'm on paternity leave now. I've closed up my studio. My wife was due yesterday with our first child, so but I'm going to go back to work in January, and I'm going back to maybe a half dozen projects. But that's all commission work, so I don't really know when I'm going to get to personal work again. I've had a really good run of commissions, but I have a hankering to do something more meaningful to me. A large part of my work is is, I guess what's most important to me really is the material and the process, and those are the things that really engage me. Subject matter is sort of is in addition to these first two elements, and I guess that is sort of born out of my my artisanal training, where I was like, here's a model, here's the blueprint, make the thing. And I think that kind of hung over a little bit for me. But I've been working a lot on commission work of late, and I'm really got a little bit of a hankering to get back into some personal work now. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen until maybe March. But I will say a little bit about what I hope to make then, and I hope that it won't keep getting pushed back by incoming work. Or maybe I should protect, at least a couple of weeks to do some personal work. I think that would be a refreshing thing for me to do. But I recently had a mold taken of my left ear. I have single-sided deafness, and I'm looking into getting a hearing aid for that. And when they took the mold, and they took out like this silicon negative and showed it to me, I was like, that's a sculpture right there. So you're gonna
sculpt your ear canal.
Exactly.
The positive, yeah.
I just find the casting of that negative space to be a very beautiful thing, and so I think there could be something in that where I explore the negative spaces within objects, or I'll start with that. My inner ear. I'll start there.
I love it. That's great. I'll just add quickly that, yeah, I mean, it's been a real roller coaster every year. Those of you watching, I'm sure, can relate. Yeah, I mean, there was nothing for a few months, although the bills continued here in New York. So that was a bit stressful. And then weirdly, at the end of the spring, going into the summer, some jobs started to pop up again. And now I'm totally backed up with stuff, like I got backlogged like you, Sebastian, not being able to really get into the studio. And then now I'm just like, I have like 13 things going that, I just have to finish hopefully by winter. But then who knows, who knows what 2021 will be. I'm working on 8 of those objects are stools. I designed a couple stools that have stone tops and metal undercarriages, bronze or aluminum. So I'm making 9 of those, and then a few outdoor marble pieces, and a table in there, a design table. So the marble pieces are, I'll just say, like, that's what's intriguing me most right now, because they have to be big, of a certain size, but I was told that, first I was told that 2 people needed to be able to move them in the event of a hurricane. They're going to Florida. And I had to explain that it's never going to be something that just 2 people can lift. But I'm trying to figure out a way to get it down to where maybe it's a 4 or 5 person thing by routing out from underneath.
Why would they have to move it in the event of a hurricane? They think it's going to zip around the neighborhood like a piece of plywood.
Float away.
Well, yeah. So the thing, okay, in a nutshell, the space is like a veranda, like a balcony. So there might be weight, like concerns already, although it's built out over the first floor of something else. So it's not suspended in space. And it's in a condo building. So even though like that unit is owned, it's not rented, there are condo rules that I think if you're not living there at the time, let's say it's a secondary residence and a hurricane's coming, they have to have their personnel be able to go and move like patio furniture out of the way. And so like when we asked, I said, well, find out what the load, like how much load it can bear so that we're not rolling something out that's going to like cave in. And when the question was asked, then they started asking, well, wait a minute, you know, that anything that's out here has to be liftable. And so it's been an interesting engineering problem trying to figure out how to make stone, you know, like absurdly light for its mass. But I think we finally got there. I think like 600-800 pounds is going to be okay. And which, as you know, is light for something that's going to be 4 by 4 by whatever. But I'm going to use, I will say here publicly, I'm going to use every advanced technology available. I mean, like I'm going to see if I can work with people out in Long Island who have the robot just to help me get underneath, because I could hog out that material, but we might be able to do it in a more precise way after I've sculpted the outside to you know, to see if we can alleviate some weight. But that's a topic I wanted to get into. Maybe we'll save that for next time, like the whole role of technology in sculpture, because we're going to go down a rabbit hole with it. I feel like, you know, we're going on 2.5 hours. Should we end it here?
We should probably let Alasdair get some rest. He may have some busy things tomorrow to occupy his.
Yeah, who knows when baby will come, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm ending it because I'm out of whiskey, but no, I'm just kidding. But you know, but seriously, guys, this was great, and I hope that those of you who stuck in here, I know we have some people still on Zoom and on YouTube. You know, thank you for tuning in. If this is something that you want,
we're just being polite at this point.
I know, seriously, because we can see who you are. No, I'm just kidding. No, but if you want to see more of this thing in the future, just let us know, and we'll try to, you know, find an hour or whatever in between, you know, your guys' family commitments or professional commitments. But it's been a real pleasure sitting down with you guys.
Me too.
Yeah. Nice.
I'm proud to know you guys. It's a pleasure to be included in this group. I also want to say thanks so much to Sebastian's wife, Amanda. And thank you to Steve's partner, Kelly, for I know she's behind the scenes working as well. So thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, many thanks. I think she's back there. It's good talking to you, fellas.
Yeah.
Yep. Talk soon, guys. Take care.
Okay.
Night.
Bye. Bye.